Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how to add Firebase Authentication into your Flutter apps using Riverpod. So let's get started. The first thing we need to do is to go over to our command palette here. So I'm going to go to View, Command Palette, and create a new project in our VS Code. And I'm going to call this Firebase Authentication. And then VS Code is going to help to create the project, as you can see here. And give it a few minutes. Yes, and we have a project. And first, I'm going to remove all these files and go over to the library folder here, create a new folder, call it the UI, and I'm going to create a new file, call it the login screen .dart. Okay. Now we are going to create a stateless widget and call it a login screen. And the next thing is to import material and return a scaffold here, and we are good to go. And then next is to make sure that you import your login screen here, which we have here, and then we have login screen. Okay, which is good. The next thing is to add Firebase to this project, and we are going to be using Firebase CLI for that. The next thing is to go to console.firebase.google.com, and we want to create a Firebase project. So we're going to call it Firebase Auth. Let's call it Firebase Test, something like that. We can't add that name, so this goes. So we confirm this and we continue. And then we continue. And it's going to, we don't need Google Analytics, so let's get it off. Our new project is ready and we can continue. Now we have access to this. But you see, when you want to add Firebase to your app, we have these options to get started. Recently, Flutter added this, which makes it easy to add Firebase to your apps. So clicking on this will give you these instructions. So the first thing you need to do is to install Firebase CLI, and then you're going to run Firebase login. And we have Flutter SDK installed, so we don't need this. But yeah, let's go ahead and install the Firebase CLI. So I'm using Mac, so go ahead and use Mac. And to use Mac, there is a command here that you can use, or you can use a binary, or you can use npm. So go ahead and do that. Let's go back here. And after installing the CLI, you need to run this sort of commands. So we are going to alternate between here and our project, and then we install Firebase to our app. Open our terminal. So I'm going to go to terminal, new terminal, and we have it here. And so we go back to installing the Firebase CLI. I'm just going to copy this code sample and put over here. And it should install Firebase terminal for us. Put in my password. That's wrong. Okay. So I already installed Firebase CLI, but this is how you're going to do it if you want to. So you see, my machine already has Firebase tools. The next thing is to log in, and we are going to run Firebase login. And if you do Firebase login, you should be able to log in. Okay, so I'm logged in into another account, which is not what I want. I have multiple accounts. So to do that, I'm going to do Firebase login, and there's a command reauth for you to re-authenticate. And I'm going to do this. It's going to open up your browser so you can use another account. And I'm going to use my account that I want to use. Okay, so it's going to want access to your Google account and you're going to do allow. So I'm logged in successfully and you can see it's here, which is great. So let's go back here and then install Firebase SDK, which we already have, create a Flutter project, which we already have. Next thing is to activate Flutter Fire CLI globally. So we have this, and so we're just going to paste to our terminal. I already have it activated, so it's going to be fast. It's going to download Flutter Fire to your computer globally, and the next thing is to configure Flutter Fire. Because I am in the directory of the project itself, I don't need to put this project. But if you have your terminal and you're not in the directory, then you just something like that. But now I'm just going to do Flutter Fire configure, and it's going to configure Flutter Fire for this project. And then now it's going to tell me to select which project. So we have Firebase test here. Okay, and you use space to select which project you want to enable Flutter Fire for, which I'm just going to use space to unselect macOS and web, and then hit enter, and it's going to install that. Okay, apparently we don't have this project, this Android app in Firebase, but it's going to automatically create that in our console. Okay, I mentioned the other time that you don't need to add this. Apparently, this is to select which project in your Firebase console to configure Flutter Fire for. So you could just copy all this and you're good to go. Okay, so we have if you want to update your Grady file to the Firebase configuration, we are just going to say yes, and it's going to generate a file for us, which is Firebase options, as you can see, and we have a new file. And let's go ahead and click on next. This automatically registers Firebase options.dart for you. Next thing is we are going to call await Firebase initializer and this, and we're going to go here, the main, and I'm going to put it here. I'm going to import all this, but there's a problem. We don't have Firebase installed in our project, so we are going to go over to our podspec.yaml file to add a dependency. We need to add the Firebase core package. So I'm going to go view command palette and use podspec as assist, enter Firebase core here, and we watch it install. As you can see, it's already added Firebase 1.18. When I hit Ctrl Save, Ctrl S, it's going to automatically fetch the package for me. And you can see it's already installing. And if I go back to the main.dart, and I can import it here, and we are good to go. we need to add this snippet widget Flutter binding that ensure initialize before Firebase, and that will make sure that this is initialized before our app is run. Okay, so let's go ahead and then have a design for the login screen. So we want a simple login. And there we go, we have a simple login screen. And if I pick an emulator, and then we are going to run the app on an emulator, and let's see what we have. I have a login screen that's going to take email and password, which we're going to use for Firebase Auth. To add authentication to our apps, we need a couple of dependencies. And the first one is Riverpod. And I'd like to usually add Auth Riverpod into my project. So Auth Riverpod goes in there. And the next one will be Firebase Auth. It will add the Firebase Auth package into our apps. So let's go back to prospect.yaml and have a dependency issue here for hooks Riverpod. So I'm going to drop this version from 1.0.4 to 1.0.3 because I don't have the latest Flutter. So if you have the latest Flutter, you are going to be able to use 1.0.4. We will create a folder called repository, which will hold our auth repository. And inside the repository, we have auth repository dot, and we are going to create a class called auth repository. Yes, now we are going to create a constructor this.auth. So we have an underscore here. And then we are going to have a final Firebase auth, and it will be auth. Okay, this way we are doing some dependency injection. Next is to implement some method in Firebase Auth. If you go into Firebase Auth, you see that there's a method for you. And let's go down a bit. And you can see there's a method confirm password reset, auth changes, ID token changes, save password reset if you look at it properly. But the one we are concerned with is to sign in, sign out. And the first thing is to do a sign in with email and password. And then we are going to take an email and we're going to take a password. And then it's going to return a feature of user, which is going to be nullable, because if there's no user, that means we are not able to sign in successfully. And the next one is we are going to have a sign out, which is going to be a feature of void anyways. Okay, so we have the auth repository set up, but we need to be able to initialize our Firebase auth. Usually there is a way you can do it. You can say Firebase auth and do something like this, which will give you Firebase.instance, but this is a secret thing and it's very hard to test. So we are not going to do that. Instead, we are going to use dependency injection for what we want to do. To create an instance of Firebase Auth, we are going to use Riverpod to create global dependencies for that. So in library file, lib folder, create a new folder called providers. And in here, I'm just going to say auth provider dot. Okay. We are going to import hooks Riverpod here, and then our auth repository here, and we have Firebase.instance. You can see we are passing an instance of Firebase that in through the constructor of the auth repository here. So once you have an instance of Firebase here, it goes straight to our auth repository here. We can improve our auth repository a bit by doing some error handling. So I'm going to have a class called auth exceptions that is going to implement exception. Okay, so instead of doing this, we are going to put this all code into a try catch and like this. But instead of catch exception like this, we are going to do on Firebase auth exception catch, because Firebase throws its own exception. And we are going to do something like this. If the code is user not found, we are going to throw some error like this. So that means when the user is not found, it's going to throw an auth exception user not found. If it has a wrong password, of course, wrong password. And if it doesn't take any of this, it's going to just show a generic error. There are other errors in Firebase that you could explore. Just go into here and check the error messages. Lastly, on auth repository, we need to add this. It's going to give us a stream of the state change of the user. So when the user changes, when it logs out and do some other stuff, maybe the token changes, we are going to listen to a stream of the change here. Now we are back in the auth provider dot, and we need to add another global provider that will provide the auth changes that we added in the auth repository. So here is how to do it. We're going to have a stream provider that is going to take the user, and then we are going to read our auth repository provider here, and then we do a .auth state changer. And this provider, we are going to use it in a new file called auth checker, which is going to check if the user is authenticated or if the user is signed out. That is what we are going to use to show which page to go through to the user, depending on the state of the user. Therefore, we go ahead and create a new file called authchecker.dart in our UI. And here we are going to implement and the page the user should go depending on their state. And here is the code for the auth checker. It's going to extend a consumer widget, which we can get from Riverpod. And then we import material because we need that. And then our auth state provider here. So what I've done is I have a final variable called auth state change that is going to watch our auth state provider. So we can do .when there's data, do this. When it is loading, show the screen. When there's an error, go back to our login screen. So we are going to import login screen, and then there's a splash screen here that is going to show when there's a loading happening. But we don't have splash screen yet, so we are going to create that. And we're just going to create a stateless widget, simple stuff. And we're going to call it splash screen. And it's going to take a scaffold. And inside the body, we're going to have a center. And inside the center, we're just going to have a circular progress indicator, something simple like this. Now we don't have a home screen yet, so we create a new file and we call it home screen.dart, and it's going to take a stateless widget and we're going to call it home screen. And of course, we're going to import material, and then we have a scaffold, and let's keep it simple for now. And we go back to the auth checker and we have import the home screen. So now look at this code a bit again. What this is saying is when there is data and the data comes with a user. So if the user is null, go back to the home screen. Or else is not equals to null, sorry, go to the home screen. Else go to the login screen. And also we are saying that when it is loading, you should go to the splash screen. If there's some sort of error, we are still in the login screen. Okay, so that is it about the Auth checker. The last thing we are going to do with the Auth checker is we go back to our main page. Instead of login screen, we put in the Auth checker there, and we are good to go. Now, there's a final thing to do is to implement the login screen so that when you hit this button, sign in button, is going to go all over to our Auth repository and call this method. To implement the login, I need a folder called VM. It's supposed to be a view model for login. But inside here, I'm going to have a new file called login controller.dart. And the next one is a new file called login state.dart. This will handle all the states of the login. But for now, I still need a package called equatable. You will see how I'm going to use that in a bit. Go to our prospect.yaml file and see we are having equatable 2.0.3. Okay, so here is what I need it for. I want to create several states for my login state, and I need equatable for that because it's going to check a base class to facilitate the operator equals to here. What it does is that it checks, it compares two classes if they are the same, basically. Okay, so we go back to our login controller. This is where the magic happens. For a login controller, we create a class that is called login controller, and it's going to extend state notifier. We are using state notifier because we have login states, and it's going to be of type login state here that we've created. Next is to have a constructor login controller that is going to take this .ref, and this .ref is ref from Riverpod. If you look at ref, is like an object used by providers to interact with other providers. We create a method called login that is going to take an email and password, and we are going to put this async modifier there. And next thing is we are going to start with having a login state loading. This is going to show that this is loading, and then we are going to read from our repository provider the sign in with email and password here, and then a login state success. For some reasons, if this doesn't work, we are going to have a login state error here. And here, we are going to take a string of login state. The next thing we want to do is to expose this login controller in a provider. We are going to make a final login controller provider that will take state notifier provider, which we are going to supply the login provider, controller, and the login state. And then we are going to return a login controller. You see that I'm passing the ref into the constructor here. And so it's going to take the ref. Now, last part is to have this login controller provider in our UI. So we are going to interact with the login controller provider in that UI to do the logging in. Okay, to implement the login screen, this is a stateful widget. So we need to turn it to a widget that will have access to our ref. So I'm going to use stateful hook consumer widget. And we have a couple of errors here, so let's fix them. That means I'm going to turn this into a consumer state, and then here I'm going to add consumer here. So consumer state. And so in our code on pressed, we are going to have access to ref, and we have all these methods. And I'm going to use the read, which will read our login provider, login controller provider, which is like this. But this is a state notifier. So what we need to do is dot notify. And using dot notify, I can do dot login here, which will take email and password. And we have the email controller and the password controller here, which are text editing editors, text editing controllers, and I can do email controller.test and then password controller.text here. And we are not done yet. When we run this app, we got this error, no provider scope. And I know where the error is coming from. So what we need to do is go back to our main.dart, and you want to wrap your my app in a provider scope. Provider scope is from Riverpod. So you need to wrap it in provider scope for it to work. So we are going to run this again and see if it works now. Okay, so we are here and good to go. But then we need to sign in to our user. So, but we don't have any user currently. So how do we know it doesn't work? So let's say I enter this email and then I enter some sort of password and hit login. There's nothing that happens. But there's something that's happening under the hood. We just didn't see that. So let's go back to our login screen and trace this all the way down. Go to our Auth repository provider, and then we go back to our Auth repository. And if I put a breakpoint here, let's see if it actually goes here. Okay, we have the breakpoint here. And then if you see this exception, you will see that there's a code unknown. And there's an internet exception happening. It's showing configuration not found. It's really straightforward. And what we need to do is go back to our Firebase project, click on authentication, and then click on get started. Clicking on get started, there are sign-in methods here. And what we need to do is click on email and password, and we need to enable that and then save. Okay, we are done. So let's go back and try again. Log in, there's an error, but we should get a different type of error. And you can see we are getting a user not found error now. That means there is no record of the user in our Firebase, which makes sense. This is what we want. But there's a problem. We are not getting it on the UI. That's user not found. So let's go back to our login and let the user see that something has happened. To let the user know something has happened, we need to use a method called ref.listen, and you can find that in Riverpod. So make sure that you are doing this under your build context. So we are going to do ref.listen, and it's going to take a type of login state here, and we are going to have, if you can see, there's a function that takes T and T. But not first, we are going to find the login controller provider. We are going to call it here, and then we are going to it's going to take previous and next. Let's do this. So this previous is previous states and the next state. So let me change this next to state, which we really need right now. And we can then do if state is login error states, what we should do is to show a snack bar, something like this. But we don't have this method anymore. So let's look for an alternative. I think there's something called scaffold messenger. Okay, so there's off dot show snack bar, and we'll be able to show a snack bar here. So let's remove this. Okay, so we are going to show the test as state.error, and it's going to give us the error that we added in the auth repository. So let's try that. Login, and it brought us user not found. You see, user not found. So we can show the user visually that something has happened. Now, let's go back to our Firebase and try to add a new user. So we go to users and we go to add user. Let me add that email again. And I'm going to add password 123456. Add user. And then we go to our app. I put the password 123456. And we are able to log in. Okay, there's nothing here. Apparently, that is our home screen, which there is nothing there right now. We are going to fix that in a bit. But let's try something. Let's refresh our app and see if we go to the home screen. Apparently it works because it has refreshed and it's going to the home screen. And how did that happen? We are using the Auth checker. So Firebase Auth automatically stores the user's tokens on the app and it's cached. So it lets you know that the user still exists on the app, which is great for us. So let's do on the home page, let's do that the user can log out, having a logout button here. So we go on our home screen. Okay, so this is the login screen. I just want to copy this text button and go to the home screen and then have the body, and I have a center, and I have a child, and it's going to take a text screen, and I'm going to call this sign out. Now to sign out, we'll make sure that we are using a hook consumer widget. So it will take in a widget ref and a ref, and we need this ref to do ref.read our login controller provider dot notifier dot sign out. Okay, we don't have a sign out here in our login controller. So let's go back to our login controller and just add a sign out method here. It will be something like this. So let's go back to our home screen and just add dot sign out here. So we have a sign up button. Let's change it to an elevated button. So it looks good. Okay, so we have sign out. So let's hit the sign out and we are back to the login screen. Let's try to sign in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we are back to the Auth screen, home screen, which is great. So that means our authentication is working. So this is how to do authentication in your Flutter apps using Riverpod and Firebase. I hope you have been able to learn something from this tutorial. If you like this tutorial, please make sure to like, subscribe to this channel so that I'll be able to bring more of these videos to you in future.